Hello and welcome to Capacity TV. Today we're joined by Tesh Kapadia from Ascom. Tesh, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So how big of an issue is fraud for the wholesale industry?
Well, it's a significant issue. Some industries say that it's about $80 billion a year that we're actually losing towards fraud. And what one's got to understand is that when you're talking about international wholesale, you're talking about every minute of traffic around the world. And if someone can make a little extra on that, that's probably going to happen. And it happens right up and down the industry. It is a bigger issue than what most people say. And the $80 billion number that gets floated around, and sometimes it's 80, sometimes it's 100 billion, those are probably conservative numbers to actually what it truly is.
And do you think the industry itself takes a sort of serious enough stance against it?
I think that you'll find that there's players and software vendors and equipment vendors in the marketplace that actually do nothing but try to capture fraud and expose it. But let me give you a small example. If we take a look at places where fraud occurs, and it happens anywhere where there's a difference in pricing between local termination and international termination. It's very, very simple. So we take places like Brazil, we take places like Jamaica, we take places like Indonesia. In these particular situations where you have a situation with a significant difference here, I could take a look at the pricing of the top 100 operators in the world. And every one of those pricing for those particular destinations are lower than the published rate for that particular destination. So I'm talking about the top 10 operators in the world are actually using gray routes to get to these places. And that's just the market. So, you know, on one hand, they're trying to capture fraud for those people who are getting dinged with fraud. On the other side, you're not competitive unless you actually use routes that are, you know, that you don't want to question how they actually got there. So it's a yes and no answer on that.
So do you want to talk me through Ascom's FAST solution? What is it designed to do?
Oh, absolutely. It's an interesting platform. So we have a fraud, a revenue assurance, and a real-time transactional processing engine based on big data analytics type architecture where we capture everything, we revenue assure it, we slice and dice the data any way an operator would like based on today's technologies. And what happens is that we help detect the fraud, we help revenue assure the fraud, so we'll actually reconcile the traffic, and then we have an engine that'll actually give you the analytics to actually figure out what the next part is. The interesting thing about fraud is that the people who actually perpetrate the fraud know what's happening. Let's say it's a the SIM-box operators and so on. So there's people that have measures to actually to catch it, like we would do, and they would have countermeasures against us, and then we would have countermeasures upon countermeasures. So when we take a look at our platform, the way we've architected is we've put in every rule that we could actually possibly put together and put it in memory, and what happens is we have hundreds of millions of transactions coming through, and within seconds we can dissect it and say, listen, this would be abnormal behavior and this would be the normal sort of distribution of traffic going through. So we believe we've got a unique way of looking at this stuff.
And what else is Ascom doing in the fraud prevention space?
What we're doing is we're actually educating operators on how fraud is sort of happening in their networks and how do they actually make differentiated product offerings based on what they're offering to other operators, given that we're in the wholesale space. I'll give you one sort of example. In sort of some of the developing worlds that we see that fraud is actually perpetrated internally to the actual telco that it's happening in. In these types of situations, we've gone to other telcos or wholesale players that are significant players in the marketplace and say, instead of going to a telco out there and say, listen, just outsource all your traffic to me, I'm going to actually sell you an insurance policy. Now what this means is I've actually talked to CTOs and say, I know there's fraud within my internal organization. We want to have a secret project where we do X, Y, and Z. And that doesn't work because if you have internal fraud, it's people are going to cover that up on the network side. So what we do is we've got a solution that we're coming to market with, saying that, listen, as you outsource the traffic, we're going to actually take a look at your retail traffic as well. We're going to take a look at your retail database. We're going to put it in our fraud solution. And what we're going to do is we're going to understand if there was any mismatch between what your billing system says it should have and what your network says it should have. And we're going to you can provide that as a service to the downstream operator type thing. So now the local operator is not trying to find fraud in its own network. You've got a third party, which is their distributor or their wholesale partner, finding fraud on their behalf. And what happens with fraud is that it's got to be a business case for someone to make it make sense. So I think if we get past let me try to find the perpetrator of it, to making it a business issue, I think it'll take us one step forward to actually decreasing fraud throughout sort of the industry as we see it today.
Thank you very much for joining us today on Capacity TV.
Thank you for having me.